Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, and we're going to talk about DM Bluddworth's channel, Unscripted, Unchained, RPG review, and the idea that DM Bluddworth and all his players and his cohorts, not saying that in a derogatory, just the people in his circle, that sounded a little more harsh than I wanted it to, all agree that they're doing high mechanical complexity on social interaction. What I want to explain today is that the DM Bluddworth, he's a D&D not player. Well, actually, no, he is a D&D then player. Let me correct myself. He's playing 1E Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, right? And he and his crew think they have mechanical complexity on their combat and mechanical complexity, and they have high mechanical complexity on their combat, and they have high mechanical complexity on social interaction. They're wrong on both counts, and I'll explain why. All right, so first of all, before we even get into social interaction, DM Bluddworth and his crew, because they refuse to play D&D now, they play D&D then because it's comfortable for them. It's what they did in the 80s, right? It's what they like, right? They have every right to do that, but they shouldn't do that because it's atrophying their intellect and their empathy and a few other things too, right? And one of the things is they're like, we have high mechanical complexity on our combat. And the reality is, when it comes to complexity, DM Bluddworth and his crew know less than nothing, virtually nothing. And because they are eschewing complexity. They are escaping complexity everywhere they can. In one area, they're gleefully escaping complexity on combat, and on the other, they don't even know the complexity that is coming, right? Again, because they're going and reading books that are 30 years old, learning nothing because that stagnant dead edition cannot teach them anything, right? Okay, so let's get into combat first, right? So they think they have high mechanical complexity on combat. They don't even have that, right? So first of all, they're playing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. This is 1E, right? Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition combat, damage types, better, the fact that THACO isn't there. THACO sucks. It's like you got to do negative math, right? Like, THACO is really bad, right? And in addition to that, basically, they're playing a version of combat. So their 1E is this stagnant, unmoving brick that has has like 3 moving gears, right? 5th edition is sitting on top of all the lessons learned from 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E. There are literally hundreds, if not well over 1,000 pages of math that has gone into bounded accuracy and a whole bunch of additional improvements from 5E, right? So the reality is they don't even know complex. And when you come to 5E complexity, you have 33 carefully crafted books, right, that are bringing together the best from 5 editions of combat and are layered in a complexity Gordian knot that far dwarfs the mechanical complexity on combat that they're working on, that will never change, that was simple when it began and is simple now, right? So the reality is they don't even understand complexity at the level of combat, right? Now let's talk about, so then they had this conversation. They're like, we can all assure ourselves that we have high mechanical complexity in social interaction. They don't, right? And the reason why is, right now, what Strixhaven has shown us is we haven't even started high mechanical complexity for social interaction until Strixhaven came, right? So there's student dice in there, and there's hierarchy, okay? And there's advantage that's coming for friend and beloved. This is the first time in history for Dungeons & Dragons that there are mechanics that center around love, right? And again, what mechanics does 1E give on love? I can tell you, 0, right? There's 0 mechanical complexity. And so I think the reality is, DM Bluddworth he's hanging with his crew, it's his kind of people. They're not attracting young players, right? They're just talking, they're echo chambering, right? And so basically, now one thing before we go a spot further, the entire point of my channel is to get what's happening on Diaz Bluddworth's channel to happen, right? For older, D&D then and D&D not players to actually step back and say, wait, are we actually playing, a dead, stagnant edition? And they're having those conversations. So I really do appreciate that, DM Bluddworth. And you came to the wrong conclusion, but I appreciate that the conversation is happening, right? Okay. All right. So basically, let's talk about the mechanical complexity, right? So here's why I keep saying this. I'm saying, hey, you don't know what social interaction mechanical complexity is. So it's on me to prove that, right? So let me explain what actual high mechanical complexity looks like in Dungeons & Dragons, where we're heading in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, right? So one of the things is, right now in every version of Dungeons & Dragons that you play, you could do a sword attack like this. You could say, the DM could say, your difficulty check is 15, roll your dice, and the person says, my result is 17, and my damage is 11 points, right? They don't even talk about what kind of sword it is, what kind of swipe it is. They don't give any narrative description, right? Any of that, right? But they know because there's a structure, right? That structure is just now being built with Strixhaven, okay? So let me explain to you where we're heading, right? So right now you have, on combat, you have attacker and defender. Attacker attacks and sees if they can hit. If they hit, they get to do damage. Then they apply the damage, and there's vulnerabilities. And there's a lot more complexity beyond that. I'm just giving you the basics there, right? And then if they're at 0 hit points, they go into death saves. If they're not, they're there, right? There's a structure, right? And there's a lot more than there's attack of opportunity and just layers and layers and layers of complexity. Where we are right now for social interaction is, DM Bluddworth flaps his gun, is like, here's the NPC says this. And then one of his players says, well, my player says this. And then they're like, okay, roll persuasion, or whatever the one and then they're like, oh, high mechanical complexity. No, it's so shockingly wrong. Let me explain why. Okay, so here's where we're heading. Requester, requestee, social interaction. And this will be the structure for everything that's there. And it might change on one of these gears might change, but this layer of complexity is where we're headed, okay? So you will acknowledge requester and requestee. A requester wants the requestee to escort a princess from Waterdeep to Neverwinter, through the Neverwinter woods, and they're going to stop in Phandalin, okay? That's the request. Requester, requestee. So here's what you need to understand, okay? 1, what's happening? Is it convince, control, or convert, right? You have to understand that. I've done an entire video just on those 3 words, okay? Then you have to recognize hierarchy. What is the hierarchical structure, okay? Is the requester somebody who has followers, who could exert force without doing anything themselves, right? Is the requestee high hierarchy, right? Nobility, right? Who can't be, their opinion can't be changed by coin, things like that, right? Then once you establish hierarchy on both the requester and the requestee side, then you need to deal with position, okay? Now in combat, position is incredibly simple. You're here, and your attacker is here and your defender is there, right? And there could be some complexity there, but look at the complexity, the same complexity as far as positioning, okay? On both the requester and the requestee, you need to consider these positions, right? What is their personal position on this? What do they personally feel about doing this thing, about being convinced, controlled, or converted, okay? What is their affiliations position? So they might have a personal opinion, but if they're part of a guild, or if they're part of a noble family, what is the affiliation position, right? And now that you know the personal position, and now that you know the affiliation position, let's talk about temporal position. Temporal means time, right? So your personal position may have been one way, and your affiliation position may have been one way, but that might have changed because somebody died yesterday. That might have changed because there's a tornado that's going to sweep through Phandalin in 2 days. That might change because of the temporal meaning around these things, right? So now that you know your requester or requestee, now that you know if you're trying to convince, control, or convert, now that you know the hierarchy of your requester and your requestee, and now that you know the personal affiliation and temporal position, now you can make your roles, and you could, and also we need to see is where does the talk fit in, right? Is the dungeon master going to give any pluses, or are they going to give any are they going to give advantages because the player actually spoke well? Or do we, the player says, this is what my character is saying, but there's so much complexity behind it, we abandon the gum flapping. And that isn't even necessary. There's a ton of combat that happens right now in 1, 2, 3, 4E and 5E where they don't go, I swing my sword this way and and it clangs against the armor, blah blah blah, right? And actually that's not a blah blah blah. It's really helpful and it's good, but it's not necessary when you're like when you're doing your 4th round and you're an hour and 40 minutes into a single combat, right? Like, so there are times where the gum flapping disappears and it's all on the dice, right? So that DM Bluddworth, right? Now that you understand, there are literally like 12 moving gears here. The social interaction you are talking about is not even remotely the future that Strixhaven shows us we can have, right? And the reality is what I said before in my other video is 100% right. You have never done social interaction, and because you're not reading Strixhaven and you're not staying on the new, and you're on these stagnant old games that are never going to change you, which I think you see as a benefit, right? And you could just kind of wallow in your position and talk with your crew, and all assure yourselves that you know what complexity is. The reality is you don't know what complexity is because you're not allowing yourself to be informed, right? You're allowing yourself to echo, right? And you're going to read your 1E adventure again, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons again, and learn the same thing you did before and not change and remain stagnant and unmoving, right? So you don't understand you don't understand that you're literally playing the simplest version of combat, and you're also not even aware of the complexity that's going to occur when you hit 5E. But I want you to be there, and that's why I keep having this conversation. I don't want you guys left behind. I see value in what you know and in your decades of play, and I see it being wasted, truly, right? So I really appreciate you guys having the conversation, and thanks for letting me explain to you what true complexity really is and where we're actually heading with Strixhaven, right? And I hope you understand that there are FLGSs around you filled with great books that will actually change your mind and heart and allow you to not just stagnate and shrivel and desiccate. I hope you get there. All that's my opinion. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing. Have a wonderful millennium.